Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I am bringing you a book review for Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson, which is the first book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. If I pronounce Malazan wrong at any point during this video, it's because this is my partner's favourite series of all time, and I have for the past 3 years got used to him pronouncing it Malazan, and I've since seen a lot of YouTubers pronouncing it in various different ways, and my brain at this point has no idea how to actually pronounce it. So this is the first book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, which is an epic adult high fantasy series. There's 10 books in this particular series, the Book of the Fallen. However, there's also prequels and spin-offs and other books that are set within this world. So I wanted to make a video talking about this because I have a lot of thoughts. I am going to keep this video spoiler free just to set expectations. I was debating whether to do a spoiler video, but actually I think I can get my points across without going into spoilers, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who are really curious about whether this series, or at least this first book, is worth picking up. As I said, this is my partner's favourite series of all time, and I think that is part of why I found this book so intimidating. I have been putting off reading this book for quite a while. I actually had a conversation with my partner about a year ago where he was asking if I had any plans to ever pick up Gardens of the Moon, and I said yeah, sure, let's do it in 2025, because he was really interested in rereading it. And now it's 2025 and I have agreed to read Malazan, and it's finally happening. I am gonna try the second book before deciding whether I want to continue this series. I had a lot of mixed feelings on this first book, so again, just to set expectations for this video, I am going to be talking about what I liked, what didn't quite work for me, what I found frustrating, and all of that stuff. But in terms of my star rating, I'm going to wait till the end of the video actually to tell you, because I feel like my star rating doesn't really summarise how I felt about this book. We went on a journey with this book. I did buddy read this as well. I can't remember if I mentioned that. I buddy read this with my partner. So again, that was a really interesting experience because there was a lot that he understood that I didn't. But I think the best place to start is with a description of this series. So all you need to know, in my opinion, is that this is a history of the Malazan Empire. That is actually the best description that I've heard of this series, is that it is documenting the history of this empire, which is huge. It has spread far and wide across many continents, but Gardens of the Moon in particular focuses on this one continent of Genebakis, where the Malazan Empire is about to invade. It's making plans to invade one of the last free cities of this continent. You follow characters within the Malazan Empire, and then you also follow people who live in this city of Darujistan. There are also gods in this world, and there are other races other than humans, and my favourite thing about this book was how expansive the world felt. There are so many fantastical elements, and the world just felt so immersive. I got halfway through this book and I couldn't believe how much had been crammed into those first 300 pages. There is a map at the beginning of the book, which hopefully my camera is focusing on. This is the continent of Genebakis. However, just to set expectations, the first few chapters actually take place somewhere else in the world. So I got very confused because I was looking at this map trying to find out where we were and trying to like align myself within the world, and I turned to my partner and he explained that actually we were on a completely different continent for the time being, but most of this book does take place on this continent of Genebakis. I believe the next book actually takes place in a completely different location and it follows completely different characters. Maybe there's a few crossovers, but I'm really excited about that. I know that some people don't like that and want a continuous story. However, I am quite excited to explore a different area of this world and see if the culture and the customs are different. I love all of that stuff, and I really loved the world in this, and that is one of the main motivations behind me continuing this series for now. I had heard a lot of people describe this series as confusing, and for some reason that gave me the expectation that the writing was going to be really dense, and I was pleasantly surprised that that's not actually the case. The writing, in my opinion, has a really good balance between dialogue and description. So in terms of the prose itself, I think if you are used to reading epic adult high fantasy, then you're not going to struggle, and I don't think this book should be intimidating for that reason. What is a little bit confusing and what took me a while to get used to is the writing structure and the way that Steven Erikson tells the story. So there's very little exposition or explanation behind a lot of the stuff that happens in this book. You kind of have to read into context clues to understand and follow what's actually going on. For example, there's a scene where a character is using a deck of cards to do something, and you see this character use this deck of cards. It's called a deck of dragons, and they start flipping these cards over, and then through their internal monologue you hear them think, okay, so this means this and this means this. And so from that scene you can gather that these cards have some kind of prophecy ability. I kind of pictured them as being similar to tarot cards. You're not actually told that that's what they are. Like, at no point in the book are you actually told what these cards do or how someone uses them, because obviously the characters already know how to use them. So it just feels very natural. They're not going to explain things to the reader. It all just feels very organic, and so that felt very unique and refreshing on the one hand, but it was also frustrating at times, and it did take me at least half the book to get used to that. I am someone who prefers a hard magic system with very specific rules and restrictions, and that is not what this world is. There's very much that element and that feeling that anything could happen and that anything's possible, which again I think I struggled with a little bit, especially because there is a point in the book where you have this climatic scene, and the way that that scene is resolved, it felt convenient to me because it was resolved through this thing, this element that up until that point we hadn't been told about. I have faith and I have confidence that Steven Erikson knows this world and this magic system very well, and so I'm sure that if I was rereading this, having read the rest of the series, I'm sure this thing is going to come up again in later books, and so it's going to make more sense. But in that moment I did feel a little bit deflated. I felt like I had been cheated of that moment of satisfaction. I love it when I'm reading a book and things don't make sense, and then suddenly stuff does start to make sense and it clicks into place. And I had that a few times in this book, but also I felt like I was really having to work for it. I think this is a series where you do really have to pay attention and read it closely and give it the time that it needs. Another thing I struggled with was the characters. I felt like I was spending so much time trying to get my head around the world building. I wasn't really connecting or caring about any of the characters, and that did change as I went through the book. It's not unique to this book. I have found it with other epic fantasy series where if the perspective moves around a lot, then I do struggle to care about the characters, but I'm not a huge character driven reader. There's no main character in this book and there's no main antagonist. For most of the book you're actually trying to work out, okay, are these guys good? Are these guys bad? And there's no right answer to that. It's all very fluid, and again that was something that I really appreciated. I think with some of these characters I would have appreciated spending just a little more time with them on page. For example, there's a group of characters who have clearly known each other for a very long time, and you know that from very early on that this is like a found family. However, I wasn't really feeling that personally. There was this distance almost that was created. We didn't spend that much time with them in the beginning, and so I was struggling to understand the dynamic of this group, and I felt like I was just having to roll with it and just accept, okay, these guys have known each other for a long time, so what could that potentially mean? I felt like I was having to fill in the gaps myself, whereas if I'd seen them interact more on page, especially in the beginning, then it would have made more sense to me. Yeah, I don't think the characters were the strongest element of this book. There were still characters that I liked and that I enjoyed following. There was one character that I didn't like, and that was Krupe or Croup. I didn't like his perspective. For anyone who hasn't read this, there's a character who talks about himself in the third person, and I hated it. It did in some ways like make him feel unique and he stood out as a character, but I just, every time I got to his perspective, I was like, oh my goodness, you are so annoying, so irritating, will you please be quiet? In terms of my hopes for future books, I am hoping that the romance in this series is going to be kept to a minimum, because I did not like the romantic elements in this book. To be fair, like, romance is the smallest part of the book. There's, I think, like 2 romantic situations, and the first to me felt like it came out of nowhere. I think this is like a really personal thing, because last year I read so much mediocre romantasy that I've now just become jaded, and I just don't want to read a poorly developed romance anymore. Like, I'm done with it. I feel like I've just become more sensitive to romances that feel forced. It's really not a big deal. I can get past it because at the end of the day, I'm not reading epic fantasy for the romance in the same way that I read romantasy for the romance. Just something that I wanted to mention. I really hope that there is not that much romance in the rest of the series. What was really interesting to me is that from what we know about the world so far, there doesn't seem to be any sexism or misogyny. There are women who are part of the Malazan army, and there were female mages. There's so many different types of character groups. Like, there are mages, you know, there are people who use magic. Within the city of Genebakis, there are thieves and assassins, and there didn't seem to be any sexism or misogyny that I picked up on, and I am really curious whether that was a deliberate decision and whether there's just none of that within this entire world, or whether it's just the Malazan army and Genebakis where that is the case. And that again is another reason why I'm so interested to explore other areas of this world. If you're thinking about reading this book for the first time, then my main piece of advice would be to be prepared to be confused. You are not meant to keep track of everything. There is a character list at the beginning and there's a glossary at the end, and I found those really helpful for when I was completely lost, but you are not meant to keep track of everything because there's just so much that is in this book. If you can convince someone to buddy read it with you, then I think that would be a real benefit. What me and my partner did is we caught up after pretty much every chapter, sometimes every other chapter, and we had a conversation that was basically me trying to explain to him what I thought we just read and what had been revealed and what I thought the connections were. It was a really fun way to read it. However, if that isn't possible for you, then I would recommend making notes. There were a few occasions where I had to look stuff up because I was completely lost, but if you take time, then I think that this is worth reading, and I am really glad that I read it because I enjoyed it a lot more, I think, than I was expecting. Even though I gave it 3 stars, I have heard that the rest of the series gets better and better, and that this is actually the weakest book in the series. Also, I feel like this is a book that is going to stick with me and that I'm going to keep thinking about, so I might end up increasing my rating further down the line. But yeah, for now, I am going to wrap up this book review here, so thank you for watching if you made it this far. Let me know in the comments if you have read Gardens of the Moon and how you found it. Let me know your thoughts on this series as a whole and if you agree with anything that I've said. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and click subscribe if you'd like to see more videos from me, but otherwise I will see you next time. Bye.